The beginning of the end wasn't marked by anything dramatic or obvious. There were no heated arguments, no slammed doors, no cryptic text messages left carelessly on a glowing phone screen. My wife, Claire, and I had been married for 8 years, and for most of that time I believed we were happy. We had built a life together that others envied. A cozy home in a quiet suburb, steady careers, and a circle of friends who seemed to think we were the perfect couple. If there were cracks in the facade, I didn't see them at first. Or maybe I didn't want to see them. Looking back, there were signs I should have noticed. The gradual shift in Claire's demeanor, the late nights she started spending at her book club, the subtle but telling way she began guarding her phone as though it held state secrets. But at the time, I chalked it up to the natural ebb and flow of marriage. People change, I told myself. Life gets busy. It didn't mean anything. Then came the day I found the scarf. It was draped over the back of the couch one Saturday morning when I stumbled downstairs, groggy from a restless night. Claire had already left for her yoga class, leaving me alone with a pot of coffee and a quiet house. The scarf wasn't hers, that much I knew immediately. Claire's taste was classic and understated. While this scarf was bold and flamboyant, its vibrant colors and intricate patterns unlike anything I'd ever seen her wear. Curious, I picked it up, the silky fabric cool against my fingers. It smelled faintly of perfume, a scent I didn't recognize. My mind raced through possible explanations. Perhaps a friend had left it behind during a visit, though I couldn't recall anyone being over recently. Or maybe Claire had bought it on a whim, an impulsive departure from her usual style. But deep down, a small, insistent voice whispered that something wasn't right. I decided to ask her about it when she got home, but the moment passed, lost in the mundane busyness of the day. By the time we sat down for dinner that evening, I had convinced myself it wasn't worth mentioning. The scarf was still on the couch, a silent presence that seemed to mock my indecision. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice other things. Claire's schedule grew increasingly erratic, her book club meetings stretching late into the night. She became more secretive with her phone, tilting the screen away whenever I walked by. There were sudden changes in her appearance, too. A new haircut, expensive skincare products, lingerie that wasn't meant for me. I told myself I was imagining things. Claire was a grown woman with her own life, her own interests. Just because she was changing didn't mean she was hiding something. But the nagging doubts refused to go away. They lingered in the back of my mind, growing louder with each passing day. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through Claire's social media accounts. Her posts were the same curated snapshots of our life together. Smiling selfies, pictures of weekend getaways, captions about how lucky she was to have me. But as I scrolled further back, I noticed a subtle shift. There were fewer posts about us, more photos of her alone or with her friends. It was as though I had been slowly erased from her narrative without even realizing it. Then came the night I met him. Claire had invited a few coworkers over for drinks, a casual get-together to celebrate the end of a big project. I played the role of the dutiful husband, mingling and making small talk while Claire flitted around the room like the perfect hostess. That's when I noticed the man in the corner, his eyes following Claire with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His name was Alex, and he was everything I wasn't. Tall, confident, and effortlessly charming. When Claire introduced us, her hand lingered on his arm just a moment too long. He smiled at me, but his eyes betrayed nothing but disdain. It was as though he saw me as an obstacle, something to be brushed aside. As the night wore on, I watched the two of them interact. They were careful, their exchanges subtle and discreet, but there was an undeniable familiarity between them. A shared glance here, a quiet laugh there. I felt like an outsider in my own home, a spectator to a play I hadn't been invited to. The doubts that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over the next morning. Claire left early for a meeting, but something about her demeanor felt off. She was jittery, her usual calm replaced by a nervous energy that set me on edge. As soon as she was out the door, I found myself reaching for her phone. I had never gone through her phone before. It felt like a betrayal, a line I wasn't sure I could cross. But my desperation for answers outweighed my guilt. Her passcode hadn't changed, and within moments, I was scrolling through her messages. Most of them were innocuous, the usual chatter with friends and coworkers. But then I found the thread with Alex. My heart sank as I read their messages, the playful banter, the inside jokes, the plans to meet up. It wasn't overtly incriminating, but the implication was clear. They were more than just co-workers. I felt a wave of anger, hurt, and betrayal crash over me. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together, was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next few days passed in a haze, the weight of what I had discovered pressing heavily on my chest. Claire went about her life as though nothing had changed, her cheerful demeanor a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I was torn between confronting her and gathering more evidence. The messages with Alex were damning but not definitive. If I confronted her now, she could deny everything, dismissing my concerns as paranoia. I needed something concrete, something irrefutable. My first step was to learn more about Alex. I started with the obvious: social media. His profiles were carefully curated, filled with photos of his travels, his workouts, and the occasional shot with friends. There was nothing overtly incriminating, but the captions told a story of a man who lived for the thrill of the moment. His posts about work were scarce, but I managed to piece together that he had joined Claire's company about a year ago. That timeline aligned suspiciously with the changes I'd noticed in her. Determined to dig deeper, I reached out to one of Claire's co-workers, someone I knew casually from a few office events. Under the guise of casual conversation, I brought up Alex. My contact's tone shifted immediately, and they hesitated before speaking. "Alex is interesting," they said carefully. "He's charismatic, sure, but there's something about him that doesn't sit right. He's a little too close to some people, if you know what I mean." Their words confirmed my suspicions but left me craving more details. I decided to take matters into my own hands. One evening, Claire mentioned another late meeting. She kissed me goodbye, her perfume lingering in the air as she walked out the door. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my coat and following her. The thrill of spying on her felt foreign and wrong, but the alternative, doing nothing, was unbearable. I trailed her car through the quiet streets, my heart pounding with every turn. She didn't head to her office, as she had claimed, but to a small bistro on the edge of town. It was the kind of place we used to go for date nights, intimate and discreet. From the shadows of the parking lot, I watched as she entered and was greeted by Alex. They embraced briefly before sitting at a corner table, their heads bent close together in conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language spoke volumes. The way she leaned toward him, the way he reached across the table to touch her hand, it was unmistakable. They were more than just colleagues. Returning home that night, I felt a strange mix of anger and resolve. The truth was beginning to take shape, but I needed more. I needed proof that would force Claire to confront her lies. Over the next few days, I delved into her digital life. Her phone was locked tight, but her laptop, which she often left unattended, provided a treasure trove of information. I discovered an email chain between her and Alex, filled with inside jokes and plans for future rendezvous. The tone of their messages was playful but intimate, each exchange reinforcing the betrayal I already felt. Then I found the photos. They weren't explicit, but they were damning nonetheless. Pictures of them at a park, walking hand in hand, laughing as though the world didn't exist beyond them. It was the final nail in the coffin. Armed with my newfound evidence, I decided it was time to confront Claire. I rehearsed what I would say, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. That evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I brought up the scarf. She froze, her fork hovering midair, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. She recovered quickly, brushing it off as something a friend had left behind. But when I mentioned Alex's name, her facade cracked. She stammered, searching for an explanation, but I didn't let her finish. I laid out everything: the messages, the photos, the late-night meetings. Her face went pale, and tears filled her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of guilt or regret at being caught. Claire didn't deny the affair. She admitted to it, claiming it had been a mistake, something that had spiraled out of control. She begged for forgiveness, promising it was over, that she'd end things with Alex and work to rebuild our marriage. But her words felt hollow, her promises empty. How could I believe her when she had lied so easily, so convincingly? That night, I slept in the guest room, the distance between us both physical and emotional. I felt like a stranger in my own home, the life we had built together now a fragile illusion. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same. The days following my confrontation with Claire were fraught with a tension that felt almost unbearable. She tried her best to act contrite, sending me long texts apologizing for her actions, pleading with me to attend couples counseling. I couldn't bring myself to respond. Her betrayal had left a scar that no amount of promises could heal. What made it worse was the lingering sense that I didn't have the full story. Something about her demeanor, the calculated way she admitted to the affair, felt off. She was too composed, too willing to confess. It was almost as if she wanted to control the narrative. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, and that thought gnawed at me incessantly. One evening, as I sat in the quiet solitude of my office, I decided to delve deeper into Claire's recent activities. I had already combed through her phone and laptop, but I felt I might have missed something. If she had lied to me about Alex, there was no telling what else she was hiding. My search led me to our shared bank account. For the most part, the transactions were routine: groceries, utility bills, the occasional dinner out. But there were several large withdrawals I couldn't account for, each made within the last 6 months. The amounts were significant, too large to be impulsive shopping sprees, but not enough to raise a flag with our bank. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the records, each unexplained transaction adding fuel to my suspicions. I decided to cross-reference the dates of the withdrawals with Claire's calendar. She'd always been meticulous about logging her appointments, and I hoped it would give me some clue as to where the money was going. What I found instead was a glaring discrepancy. The dates of the withdrawals aligned almost perfectly with her book club meetings that had conveniently increased in frequency over the past year. I realized then that Claire's betrayal might not just be emotional or physical, could also be financial. Determined to uncover the truth, I contacted a friend who worked as a private investigator. I laid out everything I had discovered so far: the affair, the messages, the withdrawals. He agreed to help, promising to keep things discreet. Within a few days, he had traced the transactions to an account in Claire's name that I hadn't known existed. The account had been used to pay for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and even jewelry. But it wasn't the purchases that shocked me. It was what came next. The investigator discovered that the account was also linked to a series of payments made to a man named James Kessler. The name meant nothing to me at first, but a quick search revealed that James was a local attorney who specialized in divorce and asset protection. My blood ran cold. I spent the next few nights unable to sleep, replaying every interaction with Claire over the past year in my mind. Had she been planning to leave me all along? Was Alex just a convenient distraction, a way to shift my focus while she maneuvered behind the scenes? The idea that she could betray me so thoroughly, so systematically, was almost too much to bear. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I decided to keep digging. If she was planning something, I needed to know the full extent of it. I contacted the private investigator again, asking him to look into Claire's communications with James. What he found was both illuminating and devastating. It turned out that Claire had been consulting with James for months, laying the groundwork for a divorce that would leave her with the lion's share of our assets. The payments to Alex, the jewelry, the hotel rooms, all of it was part of a broader scheme to build a case against me. She'd been documenting evidence of my supposed neglect, fabricating a narrative of emotional abandonment to strengthen her position in court. When I shared this information with the investigator, he suggested a counter-strategy. If Claire wanted to play dirty, I would need to protect myself. Over the next few weeks, I began gathering evidence of my own. I compiled every piece of information I could find: the messages with Alex, the withdrawals from our account, the payments to James. I even installed cameras in the house, capturing footage of her late-night phone calls and secretive behavior. Meanwhile, I played the part of the oblivious husband. I pretended to accept her apologies, agreeing to attend therapy and work on our marriage. The ruse was exhausting, but it allowed me to keep tabs on her without arousing suspicion. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Claire's betrayal went far deeper than I had ever imagined. Just when I thought I had uncovered everything, the private investigator called with new information. It turned out that Alex wasn't just Claire's lover, he was her accomplice. The two of them had been working together to siphon money from our accounts, using the funds to finance their future plans. They had even gone so far as to forge my signature on documents authorizing the sale of some of our joint investments. The scale of their betrayal left me reeling. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. I realized then that confronting Claire wouldn't be enough. I needed to take action to protect myself and ensure that she and Alex faced the consequences of their actions. With the evidence in hand, I met with my own attorney. We devised a plan to freeze our joint accounts, revoke Claire's access to my investments, and file a countersuit for fraud. My lawyer assured me that we had a strong case, but the road ahead would be long and arduous. As I left the attorney's office that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and sadness all vied for dominance. But there was also a glimmer of hope. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. The morning of the confrontation began like any other, but the tension in the air was palpable. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my mind, anticipating every possible reaction Claire might have. My lawyer had advised me to remain calm and focused, to stick to the facts and let the evidence speak for itself. Still, the thought of facing her and laying everything bare filled me with a mix of dread and resolve. I waited until Ethan, our 7-year-old, left for school. I didn't want him anywhere near the house when the truth came crashing down. Once he was safely on the bus, I called Claire into the living room. She appeared hesitant, sensing that something was wrong, but she sat down across from me, her posture guarded. I began by recounting the timeline of her affair with Alex. I kept my voice steady, though anger simmered beneath the surface. As I spoke, I placed printed copies of their messages, the photos from their outings, and the receipts from her secret account on the coffee table. Claire's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as though she couldn't find the words to defend herself. When I brought up the payments to James Kessler, her attorney, her demeanor shifted. She stopped denying and started pleading, her voice breaking as she begged me to understand. She claimed she had felt neglected, that she hadn't planned for things to go this far. But her excuses felt hollow. They didn't explain the calculated nature of her actions or the extent of her deception. I pressed on, detailing the fraudulent transactions she and Alex had orchestrated. Her tears turned to anger as she accused me of spying on her, invading her privacy. But I wasn't about to let her deflect. I told her that her betrayal went beyond infidelity. She had tried to destroy me, financially and emotionally. Eventually, Claire broke down completely. Between sobs, she admitted to everything. The affair, the secret account, the plans to build a new life with Alex. It all came pouring out. She confessed that Alex had convinced her to siphon money from our accounts, promising her a fresh start far away from the responsibilities of our marriage. She claimed she had been manipulated, that Alex had preyed on her insecurities and fears. But even as she tried to shift the blame, it was clear that she had made her own choices. She had chosen to lie, to betray, to scheme. And now, she was facing the consequences. I told Claire that I had already taken steps to protect myself. Our joint accounts were frozen, the fraudulent transactions flagged, and my lawyer had filed a lawsuit against Alex for damages. I informed her that I was also filing for divorce, citing infidelity and financial misconduct. Her expression shifted from anger to desperation, and she begged me to reconsider, claiming she wanted to make amends. But I had made up my mind. Claire's actions had destroyed any trust one once had in her, and I couldn't imagine rebuilding our marriage on such a broken foundation. I told her that my priority was Ethan's well-being and that I would fight for full custody if necessary. Her sobs grew louder, but I remained resolute. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself and my son. In the days that followed, the fallout from the confrontation reverberated through our lives. Word of Claire's actions spread quickly among our friends and family, leaving her isolated and ashamed. Alex, too, faced consequences. The evidence of his involvement in the fraud was undeniable, and he was soon facing legal action of his own. His charm and confidence evaporated in the face of mounting scrutiny, and his career took a nosedive. As for me, I focused on moving forward. The divorce proceedings were emotionally draining, but they also brought a sense of closure. I began to rebuild my life, leaning on the support of friends and family who rallied around me during this difficult time. Ethan's happiness remained my guiding light, and I worked tirelessly to ensure that he felt loved and secure despite the upheaval in our lives. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, I received a call from my lawyer with surprising news. During the investigation into the fraudulent transactions, they had uncovered a series of emails between Claire and Alex that hinted at a far more elaborate scheme. It seemed that Alex had been planning to disappear with the money all along, leaving Claire to face the fallout alone. He had used her as a pawn in his game, exploiting her vulnerabilities for his own gain. When I confronted Claire with this information, her reaction was one of shock and betrayal. She hadn't known about Alex's true intentions, and the realization left her reeling. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes, a glimmer of the woman I had once loved. But it didn't change the fact that she had been complicit in his schemes, nor did it absolve her of the choices she had made. The legal battles dragged on for months, but eventually, the dust settled. I was awarded full custody of Ethan, and the court ruled in my favor on most of the financial matters. Claire was left to pick up the pieces of her life, her relationship with Alex shattered and her reputation in ruins. As for me, I found solace in the simple joys of fatherhood. Ethan and I grew closer than ever, our bond strengthened by the trials we had faced together. I also began to focus on myself, rediscovering passions and interests that had been buried under the weight of my marriage. One day, as Ethan and I walked through the park, he looked up at me and asked, "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" I smiled, ruffling his hair as I replied, "We already are." In the aftermath of the confrontation and the unraveling of Claire's betrayal, life began to take on a new rhythm. It wasn't the same as before, it couldn't be, but it was a rhythm nonetheless. My days were filled with the comforting predictability of routine. Morning coffee, dropping Ethan off at school, long hours at work, and quiet evenings spent reflecting on how much had changed. Yet beneath this new normal, the sense of closure I had hoped for remained elusive. While Claire's fall from grace was swift and deserved, I found myself haunted by lingering questions about how we had ended up here. Had I missed the signs? Could I have done something differently? It was easy to place all the blame on her and Alex, but part of me couldn't help but wonder if I had played a role in the breakdown of our marriage. These thoughts became my constant companions, nagging at me during quiet moments and keeping me awake at night. Despite everything, I allowed Claire limited contact with Ethan. He deserved to have both parents in his life, even if one of them had made catastrophic mistakes. Their interactions were carefully monitored, and I made it clear that any attempt to manipulate or undermine me would result in a swift end to her visitation rights. To her credit, Claire seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding her relationship with Ethan, though her remorse did little to soften my resolve. One unexpected benefit of the upheaval was the strength of my bond with Ethan. In many ways, we had become a team, navigating the challenges of our new life together. He was resilient, adapting to the changes with a grace that often surprised me. But I knew he was still processing the loss of the family he had once known. There were moments when he would ask about Claire, his questions tinged with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. I answered as honestly as I could, careful to strike a balance between truth and compassion. I also began to focus on myself in a way I hadn't in years. Therapy became a cornerstone of my healing process, helping me to untangle the complex emotions surrounding Claire's betrayal. Through these sessions, I learned to forgive myself for the things I couldn't control and to let go of the guilt that had weighed me down. I wasn't perfect, but I was determined to be the best version of myself for Ethan's sake. One day, while sorting through old files, I came across a stack of letters Claire had written but never sent. They were tucked away in a drawer, forgotten amid the chaos of our lives. The letters spanned years, detailing her struggles, her fears, and her growing discontent with our marriage. As I read them, I felt a strange mixture of anger and empathy. Her words painted a picture of someone who had felt trapped, lost, and desperate for escape. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it gave me a clearer understanding of her mindset. For the first time, I saw her not as a villain, but as a deeply flawed human being who had made terrible choices. It was a bittersweet realization, one that brought me closer to the closure I had been seeking. Several months after the dust had settled, I received an unexpected knock at my door. It was Alex. He looked nothing like the confident, suave man I had met at Claire's party. His once pristine appearance was disheveled, his eyes hollow and tired. He stood there, hands in his pockets, a shadow of his former self. At first, I considered slamming the door in his face, but curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. He apologized. Not the performative, insincere kind of apology I had expected, but a genuine expression of regret. He admitted that his actions had been selfish and cruel, driven by greed and a desire to manipulate Claire for his own gain. He told me about how his life had unraveled since the scandal, how he had lost everything. His job, his reputation, and his relationships. I listened, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him that he deserved every ounce of suffering he was experiencing. But another part of me recognized the humanity in his confession. He was broken, just like Claire had been, just like I had been. After Alex left, I felt a strange sense of relief. His visit had been unexpected, but it had given me something I didn't know I needed: validation. Hearing him acknowledge the harm he had caused brought a sense of closure that no amount of legal victories or personal achievements could provide. With time, the wounds began to heal. Claire and I established a co-parenting arrangement that prioritized Ethan's happiness above all else. While our interactions remained formal and distant, they were no longer tinged with the bitterness that had once defined them. We were two people trying to do right by our son, and that was enough. As for me, I began to embrace the possibilities of a new life. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. I discovered passions I had forgotten, found joy in small moments, and allowed myself to dream of a future unburdened by the mistakes of the past. Looking back, I see that Claire's betrayal was both an ending and a beginning. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, to reevaluate my priorities, and to rebuild my life from the ground up. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But in the end, it made me stronger. Ethan and I often talk about the journey we've been on together. He's grown into a thoughtful, resilient young man, and I couldn't be prouder of him. Our bond is unbreakable, forged in the fire of everything we've endured. Life is messy, unpredictable, and often unfair, but it's also filled with opportunities for growth, healing, and connection. As I stand on the other side of this chapter, I'm reminded of something my therapist once told me. It's not about the pain you've endured, but the strength you've found in overcoming it. And in that strength, I found peace.